Thank you, Haley. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for inviting me to this event. Do I get one of those bags? Good. Lori and I don't normally agree on a lot of issues related to trade and investment. But
Anything.
pretty much nothing. But I think we both have come to the conclusion that ISDS is a problem, that it should be purged from the NAFTA and probably other trade agreements. I think we probably arrived at that conclusion differently, taking different paths. I get questions often from media saying, you know, why would somebody from CATO oppose investor protections? Isn't that bad for business? My response is we're not pro-business. We're not anti-business, but we're not pro-business. We're pro-market. And the ISDS provisions, I think, undermine the way the market is supposed to work. It means that I believe in clear rules. We shouldn't have policies in place that tilt the playing field in favor of one party over another. That's protectionism. It has many manifestations. ISDS gives advantages to particular types of companies over everybody else, and I think that's a good start. First reason to be concerned about it. Let me just give you a little bit of background about how I get there. We support free trade, really free trade. A lot of people in Washington say they're for free trade, but they really mean that they're for opening foreign markets, but not necessarily our own. We're for free markets. Over the past 7 decades, trade has been liberalized. There's been a lot of tariff reduction. That's good. But protectionism lurks behind the borders too, and there's been this kind of effort to try to get at some of the regulatory rules, some of the laws, some of the provisions that are in place to protect societies, and so that we don't only get rid of barriers between borders, that we sort of homogenize the playing field. I support the idea that we should explore as far as we can where we can do that, but there's just some issues where you're just infringing on others' sovereignty, and I think some things need to be off limits. We have free trade agreements, so-called free trade agreements. They're not really free trade, they're managed trade. So they have some liberalization in them, but they also have baked-in protectionism, either very long tariff phase-out periods, exclusions, carve-outs, investor protections, and excessive protection of intellectual property. So the question is, should free traders oppose free trade agreements? And I would say not necessarily. Depends, if you want to make the perfect the enemy of the good. It depends. I will support trade agreements where there is that are net liberalizing, where there's more trade liberalization than protection in them. To give you an example, my colleagues and I did an assessment of the TPP when it came out. And we looked at it, took us a long time, and we studied it chapter by chapter. And actually, we gave grades to 22 chapters, grades from 0 to 10, 0 being protectionist, 10 being most free trade. We didn't give any 0s, 1s, or 2s, and we didn't give any 9s or 10s. But of those 22, we found 15 to be net liberalizing, 15 of the chapters, 5 to be protectionist, and 2 to be neutral. The investment chapter, we gave a 6, so it was slightly above, and that's because there was a lot of liberalization that made it, that got rid of discrimination for investment, something called negative list approach. There was an effort to prevent sort of localization requirements and joint venture requirements. That's good, but the investment chapter included ISDS, which we have a big problem with. But for that, we probably would have given it an 8 or a 9. So the problem with ISDS, one needn't distrust business or dislike business to not be a fan of ISDS. It's anti-market, it creates negative externalities, which are basically costs borne by those who don't benefit from the policy. So I have several reasons why. I'm just going to go through the litany very briefly. First of all, investors don't need ISDS. All right? The world consists of governments that are competing for investment. Every government wants to attract investment. And if they expropriate, or if they don't give fair and equitable treatment, they're not going to get as much investment. So the notion that this is necessary to attract, to get investment into developing countries is incorrect. Investment is risky. Of course it's risky. Foreign investment is even riskier. But that doesn't mean that these companies who want to invest don't have the resources, aren't savvy enough to do the cost-benefit analysis. The rewards better be good enough to justify the risks that they're going to take. So what they're asking is that ISDS gives them, it's just an extra sort of subsidy to them. Lighthizer, USTR Robert Lighthizer the other day, last week, said, it's always odd to me when the business people come around and say, oh, we just want our investments protected. I mean, don't we all? I would love to have my investments guaranteed, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way in the market. And I think he's right. ISDS socializes the risk of investment. So the companies are the ones who will benefit entirely from, reap all the rewards. But if these are part of a trade agreement, what might happen is that the other country might say, you know what, if we're going to give on ISDS, we're not going to open our markets as much. So that means that it's coming out of the hide of maybe U.S. exporters or U.S. workers. It could be the case that foreign companies who can avail themselves of ISDS in the United States, well, they have extra recourse relative to U.S. companies. U.S. companies have to go through the court system, domestic court system. They have a choice, one or the other. So citizens who want their government to function properly and don't want the regulations and laws challenged by other countries bear some of the cost. And taxpayers, if we have to pay compensation, also bear the cost. Those are some of the many problems. Fourth, outsourcing subsidy. I mean, ISDS subsidizes outsourcing. Lori mentioned it. Outsourcing. We are competing with the world for investment. And investors think about skills of the workforce, size of the market, infrastructure, access to ports, regulatory environment, tax environment, rule of law. The United States has always been scored pretty well on that, so it's always a safe place to invest. So if an investor is thinking, I'm going to put this service center in the United States or in, Brazil, they might come to the conclusion, well, it's either one, not sure. Oh, wait a second, we have ISDS, so the rule of law benefit, that advantage that the U.S. has, is neutralized by ISDS. It's funny, the proponents of ISDS will say that ISDS helps develop and cultivate the rule of law abroad. I see it as thwarting it, because instead of reforming domestic judicial systems, they don't have to. Developing countries can just say, oh, well, all we care about is the investment, getting investment in here, and here they have alternative sources, so they don't need to develop these things. Just a couple more, and I'll stop. So ISDS also benefits risk-averse behavior. Now that doesn't sound too bad, but if you think about it, in a market economy, you need risk-taking behavior. So company A might want to invest in Brazil. It might be risk-taking enough to say, we'll take a chance. Company B might say, well, it's a little bit too risky, we can't do that. If you have ISDS, company B is advantaged by that. So a risk-averse company, normally a larger incumbent company, is benefited, whereas the challenging company, a young company that might be willing to take more risks, which are necessary for market capitalism to work, has to take a back seat. So the other thing is the optics, and I think it's really important for trade liberalization. There is this myth out there, I call it a myth, maybe everybody here won't agree, that trade only benefits big corporations and the rich. Fact is, trade liberalization is good for smaller companies relative to bigger companies. Bigger companies can endure the higher costs. It's better for lower income Americans relative to wealthier Americans because they spend a higher proportion of their budgets on imported goods. But when you see ISDS, it makes it hard to refute that myth, which is something I try to do. I try to refute that myth. So I think if we got rid of ISDS, we would see more support for trade liberalization. Lighthizer said he wants support for NAFTA from the left and from the right. Getting rid of ISDS might help with that on the left. I'm not sure how much support would come just from getting rid of ISDS. Lori, I remember we had you at CATO a couple years ago for a TTIP conference, and I asked you that question. Would you support TTIP if ISDS were out? And you said, well. So there are other things maybe, but I think it could help at the margins, and it's an effort to compromise. So I think we need to get rid of it. It only benefits a very small subset of the U.S. economy, and hopefully it'll happen, and there'll be enough support coming over from the left, and we will restore the pro-trade consensus. Thank you.